Are you being a little unfair to the authorities in the sense that, because partly of the campaign that you and others have run over the last year, there have been efforts to change, particularly the judicial system, to speed up the process, fast-track rape cases, and also to toughen up the penalties for a whole series of sex crimes and rape. The Verner Commission came out with recommendations. Many of them are being implemented. Doesn't the government deserve some credit for that?
I think that the Verma Committee recommendations did expand, as in the new rape law does accept some of them in terms of expanding the definitions of rape and so on, and that's welcome. But I think that in many matters, the new rape law has actually gone against the spirit of what the Verma Committee recommended, all right. And for instance, we had talked about recognizing that men too can be raped. It doesn't do that. They have continued with criminalizing homosexuality. We wanted them not to stop doing that. We wanted them to make the distinction between consensual homosexual relations and homosexual rape, but they haven't done that. They have raised the age of consent.
Is it wise, do you think, and we're going to talk perhaps in a moment about the battle to change Indian mindsets. Is it wise for you to insist that when one is talking about gender equality and an end to sexual violence, that one has to put the issues facing homosexuals on the very same table as those facing women who have been raped, for example?
I think absolutely we must, because I think that it's very important to recognize here that the same laws that criminalize homosexuality, you still have a law in India that criminalizes homosexuality, that talks about unnatural sex. And I see that as part of...
Again, sorry to interrupt,
Yes.
but if you want to win hearts and minds on one particular issue, that is, you know, the very immediate challenge for your campaign of getting India to address the problem of violence against women, is it really wise to broaden the campaign in the way that you've just
You know, I think
to?
the Supreme Court has recently come in for a bit of a shock. Let me tell you about it. They overturned a Delhi High Court verdict that decriminalized homosexuality, and they assumed that they would have a whole lot of support. What I'm talking about when I say there's been a shift in public perception and the discourse, and I see that as an achievement for the movement, it is that verdict of the Supreme Court, which recriminalized homosexuality, has been greeted across the board with huge protests, and not just from small struggling gay groups, but actually from people across the board.
I mean, you sit here in Delhi and you say across the board, and you're telling me that there have been protests and people out on the streets in India's smallest, most remote villages demanding a change of the law on homosexuality?
Not in remote villages, no, but definitely in cities, definitely people who are not professedly, not elite, not at all. Large numbers of people who were part of the protests last year, for instance, I don't think they were elite in any way. They have started thinking differently, which has meant that, for instance, I'll tell you the barometer for this. Most of India's political parties, barring one that relies on the religious right, on the Hindu majoritarian right.
You're talking about the BJP?
Yes, all the other political parties.
Which is probably going to be, if one believes the polls, the next government in India.
Yeah, all the other political parties have actually had to finally come out, and they were very timid about this, but now they've come out and said, no, we believe homosexuality shouldn't be criminalized. And I can tell you that this includes political leaders have had to say this, even those with a rural mass base. So clearly something is changing on the ground. Yes.
Let us now put this conversation in the context of Indian tradition and the way India sees itself and sees its future. It seems to me that you are raising very profound questions, not just about specific issues of gender and gender-based law, but also about how women are treated in the home, within the legal system in terms of basic things like inheritance, and also about what happens inside Indian people's hearts and minds when it comes to basic issues of whether men and women are seen as equal. You're raising all of this in the end, aren't you?
I'd like to say that we are raising this in India because, we are Indians, we're Indian activists, we're raising it here in India. But I sense a feeling of solidarity, and in fact, I've been told by activists in other countries, including the UK, including the US, including France, and so many other places, that they feel a sense of strength when they see our struggle in India. So I don't see this as only about changing Indian culture or Indian ways of looking at women, but actually at the entire global sense of fixing women's roles in certain ways. I think that's happening outside India as well, and it's also being reinforced by the economic policies that we are seeing now, unfortunately, where you're having austerity measures, for instance, across the world, in India as well as other countries. And they are needing to tell women once again that you should subscribe to certain roles. If you don't, then you're a bad mother, you're not behaving in a correct way, like a good woman.
I suppose what I'm getting to, if we stick to the notion that you're saying, challenging India in a very profound way, is just how negative your view of India today is. I mean, let me quote to you words that came from Gulshan Rehman, who works at Save the Children, and she says, quote, "In India, women and girls continue to be sold as chattels, married off as young as 10, burned alive as the result of dowry disputes, and young girls exploited and abused as domestic slave labor." Now, is that a portrait of what it means to be female in India today that you recognize?
I think that we also need to recognize, along with all of that, of course, there are terrible crimes happening against
is your
Indian
view
women.
as dark as that? Because that seems to me to be a profoundly negative view of what it means to be a woman in India.
I have a dark view of what it means to be a woman anywhere in the world. All right, I don't think it is especially
empowering. But it's
not
the same being a woman in the UK as it is in India.
But I think that it's important to realize where the distinction, where the difference lies, and I think that's what we're fighting to change here. It isn't so much that women are victims here and they're not elsewhere. It is more about the fact that we are fighting the notion here in India that women have to sort of prove respectability in order to demand dignity, demand equality, and so on. So these are battles, I think, that are being fought in different parts of the world in different ways. And here in India, our emphasis is on challenging, for instance, our caste system. What is specific about Indian patriarchy?
How do you get inside people's heads and change their very basic attitudes?
Well, let me tell you something encouraging in that direction. Last year, there was this God man in India who enjoys a lot of support. And he had said something odious about the gang rape survivor at that time, saying that she could have called her attacker's brother and she could have taken the name of God and she would have been saved. Something must be wrong with her character that she got raped. And this was greeted with huge, and you asked about rural India. He visited a rural village in Bihar, and we had given a call for a protest there, my organization. We didn't expect the response we got. There were around 500 women who came armed with rotten tomatoes and so on. And they were saying loud and clear there, you're telling women that they shouldn't wear certain kinds of clothes, they shouldn't wear jeans. Then if you're going to impose those rules on women, then we are going to tell men either you wear the traditional dhoti and the wooden clogs, or else we'll beat you up. If you're going to try impose, and this is rural women talking about the right of young girls to wear jeans and use mobile phones and so on. So I think that the encouraging thing to see is that women are not looking to be rescued here in India. Women are fighting back, and we hope that women fighting patriarchy in other parts of the world will actually try to interrogate their patriarchies there, rather than doing the easy thing of being able to only recognize the patriarchy that lies out here in India or Afghanistan or wherever.
I see what you are saying, but I'm just aware that people might be watching this in countries where women's lot to women in those countries might seem a lot worse than it seems in India. I mean, there was a recent Trust Law, a legal news service survey, which said India is the worst country in the world to be female. They looked at different assessments, citing child marriage and murders for dowry and all that sort of thing. And they claimed it was even worse than Saudi Arabia. Now, to me, that seems very hard to give credibility to, credence to, because you've had a female prime minister. In the 1970s, one of the most famous leaders the world's seen. You have women chief ministers. You have substantial number of women politicians in leading positions. You have women professionals. You have a very powerful Indian feminist movement of which you are a senior figure. I mean, you couldn't have any of that in Saudi Arabia.
I think you could have some of that at least. You do have fighting
voices. There's plenty
of
that you simply could not by law have in Saudi Arabia.
That's a different thing. I'm saying that you do, the law means less to me than what it means about voices, that are resisting patriarchy everywhere, which is why I think that the singling out of India or Saudi Arabia or Afghanistan or whatever isn't really helpful in a way. We in India are fighting, okay, organizations like the Rawa are fighting in Afghanistan. Let them fight those battles. But I think that what we need to interrogate is, for instance, how, the help I would expect is the global institutions that are implicated in violence in India. Okay, you're having multinational corporations come here, women are resisting land grab, and they are being subjected to sexual violence. Now, who's responsible for that?
It's interesting, when you talk about the exploitation that comes with global capitalism, I'm reminded that not just you are a women's activist, but you are also a senior figure in the Indian Communist, Marxist-Leninist Communist Party, and I get a sense of that in your answer. But isn't there a contradiction for you here? Because the sort of India that you want to see in some ways might remind people of being a more Western, maybe even a more capitalist society. You focus on gender equality and individual liberties in a way that suggests you might want to see India become more Westernized.
I know that our opponents, especially the Hindu majoritarian right here, would like to see this in terms of Westernization and Indianization, but I think that that's not the case.
Do you want to see India become more Westernized?
I'll tell you, I see when our Hindu majoritarian right-wing leaders talk about good rapes and bad rapes, okay, genuine rapes and false rapes.
With respect, I'm asking you a simple question. Don't blame the right wing. Just answer my question. Do you see India, your vision for India's future, becoming a more Westernized society?
I don't want to see our leaders here make the kind of remarks that the Republican leaders in the United States make. They also talk about genuine and false rapes. The point I'm trying to make here is that this is not about Westernization. Westernization has all those attitudes too. Odious attitudes towards women, where you're told, were you drunk? If you were drunk, perhaps you were not in a position to say yes or no to rape, and so rape is justified. You're having all of that happening elsewhere, which is why I'm saying this is about recognizing the specifically Indian ways in which patriarchy is justified, patriarchy is emboldened here, and we are fighting those ways. But I really don't see it about making a backward India go the Western way. I see this as being a global fight against patriarchal attitudes and the systems, economic and other structures that sustain it.
A global fight.
Yes.
You could say you're embarked on an enormously difficult and long journey. I just wonder whether you believe, and I've used this word before, whether you have faith that the journey is going to get you to the place you want to be in terms of gender relations.
You asked me at the beginning of this talk, what are the changes that you see? And the real change which I do see and which I appreciate and which I'm so encouraged by is that I believe that the fight is a long and hard one, but the number of fighters here in India has expanded, it has grown up, the voices fighting have become stronger, and we don't feel as alone as we once might have. I think that the number of people who are actually joining the conversation, joining the battle, joining the slogans, that's really increased, and that's very encouraging. I hope it happens outside India as well.
Kavita Krishnan, we have to end there. Thanks for being on Hard Talk.